Today we continue our NHL offseason plan series, and we're looking at the 29th ranked team from the regular season, the Columbus Blue Jackets. They have a lot of big questions facing them this offseason, including who's going to be their new leader of the hockey operations as the general manager. We'll discuss all that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we're going to continue our offseason plan series today, and we're looking at the Columbus Blue Jackets. They're an interesting team to watch here throughout the course of the offseason. They're going to be getting a new GM. Obviously, you're going to have some other changes that we're going to go through here as well that we're expecting, and we'll see where they, what comes up for next year. But to me, they're one of the more interesting teams to watch, and we'll see what direction this team goes. But first, if you're new to this series, we're going to first recap last season, take a look at some team and individual stats, look at some changes that happened, analyze cap space, contracts, the draft, and the top questions facing the franchise in the summertime. Now let's take a look first at last year's results. They finished with a record of 27, 43, and 12 for 66 points. Certainly not a good season at all. They ended up scoring 234 goals for 22nd best in the league. They were second last in the NHL in goals against, 298. And there was actually a big gap between them and the 32nd ranked team as well. I think it was about 26 or 27 goals worse. Their power play was 31st as well, 15.1%. The PK was not great, 26 overall, 76.3%. Looking at some individual stats, the leading scorer was Johnny Gaudreau with 60 points, which by Johnny Gaudreau standards is not great. Johnny Gaudreau was typically a 85 to 100 point player through the bulk of his time in Calgary. So, when Columbus signed him, that's what they're expecting. But at the same time, he didn't have the greatest line mates. It would really, one individual can only do so much on their own. So it's not shocking his numbers are down, but his numbers being down are certainly part of, the team not doing better. But again, like I said, he needs more help, which will help all of that as well. Defenseman Zach Werenski, number 2 in scoring with 57 points. Marchenko was next, 23 goals and 42 points. Captain Boone Jenner with 35 points. And in between the pipes, the main goaltender playing the most games was Elvis Merzlikins. And of course, he had a .897 save percentage and a 3.45 goals against, not really all that great. So lots of reasons to be kind of down if you're a Blue Jackets fan this year, and you got to wonder where things are going. If you look at how the season unfolded, changes throughout the season, it was a lot. They hired Mike Babcock in the summer, which was surprising. They waited a little bit later into the summer because his contract was expiring with the Maple Leafs. He was still getting paid with that long-term Leaf deal that he had signed when he was coaching there before he was ultimately let go a few years back. But obviously, it's been a long time since he's been gone. Sheldon Keefe has been the coach there for quite a while now. That decision came with a lot of scrutiny right off the bat. You got to wonder, what was Jarmo Kekalainen and company thinking? Mike Babcock didn't even end up coaching the first game of the regular season. He didn't make it there. By the time the team was starting to report for training camp, and obviously before things got too far along, they had to let Babcock go because there were stories that came out that he was, analyzing players' phones and asking them for, weird questions and kind of just doing a lot of the same inappropriate behavior that we had heard about before. And obviously, he wanted to think and understand that he was a changed man and he learned from past mistakes, and it just seemed like it was the same old, and nothing had changed. And they ended up letting Babcock go before the season even starts. So, they didn't even make it to training camp. Like, players were reporting and kind of getting back into Columbus and meeting with them and stuff, but it wasn't even officially camp yet. So Pascal Vincent gets thrown into the fire here with not much time to prepare. That was a horrible decision. Just got them off on the wrong foot. Of course, later on throughout the season, they end up firing GM Jarmo Kekalainen. I'm sure John Davidson was involved in the decision to hire Babcock as well. I don't know who was all consulted, but did it cost Jarmo his job? I think it played a role, but it certainly wasn't everything. Jarmo Kekalainen had been the GM there for like a decade. and they have one playoff series win to show for it. So at the end of the day, this franchise in its entire existence really hasn't accomplished much, and the fans deserve better. They've had a good fan base, and they get good attendance, and they have their loyal hardcore fans there. The Cannon's a signature thing in Columbus. It's a good environment. I haven't personally been to a game there, but it is an arena I'd love to visit. It's a low key good destination in the NHL, and I think for the most part players enjoy playing there. But there's been a lot of talk around the NHL that because we've seen a lot of players wanting out of Columbus. And it wasn't so much the city, it wasn't the arena, nothing to do with the fans. I think, honestly, it was the regime. They didn't want to play for that leadership group. I think that's what it really boils down to. And at least that's what we've heard from around different sources around the NHL. So, obviously, big season of change with Babcock coming in and going out in record time. Jarmo Kekalainen losing his job after a decade in the GM chair. Now John Davidson is, in charge of finding that next GM, and head coach Pascal Vincent is waiting to determine his fate because Davidson didn't want to have to decide Pascal Vincent's fate. He's going to let the GM, whoever they hire, make that decision. It could be a case by the time they do that. It could be a late firing. Personally, Pascal Vincent, before this job, was a very well-respected assistant coach. I mean, I know he had, I remember hearing about him and watching him coach in the Q before in junior. He was a well-respected guy, but I must say, in his first gig, in his first year, a lot of baffling decisions were made, and it was just mind-boggling how things were handled. So to me, I'd be surprised if he gets to stick around, but maybe the next GM will give him a year to kind of see if he can redeem himself and make things better. I don't know. Of course, they also made some moves later into the season, made some deadline deals, trading Jack Roslovic to the Rangers, where they get a 4th-round pick, traded defenseman Andrew Peeke to the Bruins for a 3rd-round pick. They moved Bemstrom to the Penguins for Alex Nylander. That worked out quite well. Nylander played very, very well for the Blue Jackets down the stretch. We'll see if he can be a mainstay in the future. And they picked up a 7th-rounder earlier in the year, trading Eric Robinson to the Sabres. So at the end of the day, they shedded some contracts, some players that likely weren't coming back or weren't working out. And, for the most part, like I said, it was an upheaval season of change in Columbus. And we'll see what the next year brings. But the offseason is going to be interesting. They do have $23.2 million available in cap space. They got 15 contracts on the books for next year, which those numbers include just shy of $900,000 in dead cap space as well. They don't have a super long list of players that need new contracts, but let's take a look at that next. On the restricted free agent side for this offseason, they have Alex Texier, Kirill Marchenko, Cole Sillinger, Yegor Chenikov, Alex Nylander, Jake Bean, and Kent Johnson. I got to think most of these players would be qualified and retained, but not a given. There was some talk earlier in the year that a couple of Russian players that we've heard different things about Chenikov and Marchenko, maybe considering heading home to Russia, like homesick or whatever. I don't know. Again, we've heard so many different stories about players wanting out of Columbus. It's hard to believe some things and wonder what the real stories are. Those rumors seem to dissipate as the year went on, so I don't know if there's anything really there that we need to know about moving forward. Of course, Texier had been away from the team and had come back. Sillinger was a high pick. Nylander was a nice find. Johnson was a high pick. I mean, although his treatment this year was baffling to me, I do wonder if Kent Johnson has a future there. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of these players would likely be qualified, and we'll see what kind of contracts they come up with, but none of them are really going to break the bank. Marchenko did have a nice season with 23 goals, though, so he can probably command a little bit more money. And they said Nylander had a nice game down the stretch for them, but it wasn't a super long stretch, so I would assume Nylander probably gets a one-way contract next year with a small raise, would be my guess. But we'll see. On the UFA side, they only have Carson Meyer and Brendan Gaunce, so nothing to be too concerned about on that front. So $23 million, 15 contracts, and these RFAs aren't going to eat up a ton of that, but by the time you get all these guys signed, it doesn't really paint the greatest cap picture for a team that's bottom near the standings. Now, of course, a big event for them will be the 2024 NHL Draft, although they only have 6 draft picks. I'm sure they'd like to have more, and I wonder if they will make any deals to get more down the stretch here before we actually get to the draft. Their first pick is guaranteed to be in the top 6. Obviously, or 5 or 6. They're with being the 29th ranked team, you've got 3 teams ahead of you, so that you have the 4th best odds at first overall. Worst case scenarios, 2 teams below you win the lottery and bump you down 2 spots. So their worst case scenario, they're picking 6. Those odds aren't great. Odds are they're going to have a good chance to stay in the top 4. Or maybe go to 5. Like that top 5 pick is not a guarantee, but the odds are very, very favorable to do that. So you're going to be able to add them another really nice player here. So what are the top questions facing this team in the offseason? Well, there's a bunch of them. Like first, who's the new GM going to be? Their search has been ongoing for some time. Who's John Davidson going to bring in? That's the big question. To be honest, there hasn't even been a ton of speculation. I know they've talked to people for sure. You definitely don't want to take too long to get this person in place. All of a sudden you need time to connect with your other staff, prepare for the draft, free agency, and the trade season. There's a lot of big stuff coming up for off-season stuff that needs to be done where the GM plays a pivotal role. Obviously, Davidson is the interim in that role and handling things for the time being, but I don't think it's really anything he wants to do on a kind of full-time basis or make a lot of those decisions. So ultimately, that's the first order of business. I would think, considering we're getting into the latter part of April, that, by early mid-May, that this will be in place so that they have a solid 4 to 6 weeks to really prepare for the core part of the offseason. But we'll see. Obviously, then from there, they have to decide the future of Pascal Vincent. Is a coaching change going to happen? That's the other reason why you don't want to take too long to get this person in place so they can decide on the coach. And ultimately, it's tough. I honestly think they would have been better off just to clean house. Really, because it's not fair to leave Pascal Vincent hanging if he's going to be let go, because it's going to create a lot lesser odds of him finding employment in the NHL elsewhere. Could he find another job as an assistant coach? Maybe, but it's, those jobs fill up quick. There is, a handful of teams now looking for new head coaches, which will likely bring in some new assistants with them. But, again, there's lots of question marks, right? So, and if you're going to hire a new coach, you don't want to take too long to get involved with the interviews, because there's a lot of really good coaches out there that are available looking for work right now. And do you want to be coming in after that once they all kind of have already secured jobs? You got Dean Evison out there, Todd McClellan's out there, Craig Berube is out there, and there's others too, not to name some other ones. So at the end of the day, they got to make some big decisions on 2 very key pivotal roles within their organization, and time's ticking on that. And those decisions are going to impact everything else they do, because obviously, how does the GM view this current roster? Do they want to, make significant changes, or do they think that they're going to have to tinker at this for a couple of years? Hard to say. We know goaltending is going to play a big role in their results next year. We know Elvis Merzlikins does still have a contract, but he's expressed interest in getting out of Columbus and would like to be traded. That's going to be challenging for them to accommodate, given his numbers and the contract and everything that goes with it. Not impossible, but not easy either. So, addressing their goaltending, obviously they do have, a young netminder in Tarasov that will come up and, maybe play a bigger role for them next year. Or maybe they bring in another goalie via trade or free agency to form a tandem. It's difficult to say, but whether or not Elvis is there it's hard to say. I think he was ready to move on and made it clear publicly. So it's tough to come back from that, but it doesn't mean it won't happen. But we'll see. But goaltending is going to play a huge role, and a couple of their key, players in the forward group, especially, that you got to wonder about the future, like Patrick Laine. He ended the year with injury, followed by a stint in the player assistance program. Really, the year was almost like a loss for Laine. A lot of things went wrong, and it hasn't been a good run for him in a short tenure for a couple of years now in Columbus. I really have to wonder and think that this guy could be very much benefited from a fresh start somewhere else. Now, I know, again, any player who's had, injury issues and lower performance standards, when you have a bigger contract, it's tough to do. But this guy is still young. You could look at his talent level and look what he's done in the past, and I think it'd be more likely somebody would take a chance on him than some other contracts right now that aren't looking great. But Patrick Laine has not been Patrick Laine. And sometimes it just doesn't work out. And I do wonder if this is one of those times where they might need to kind of cut their losses and move on at the end of the day here. Same goes for Kent Johnson. Now, it's a different scenario there. I'm not saying that Johnson absolutely needs to be moved. Obviously, he's a little bit younger, less experienced, but just the way his season went this year and how things were handled. I thought the year before he was looking like he was going to be a solid NHL player, continuing to develop, and then this year they really kind of pushed back and didn't really want to reward him much. So, I'm not saying it's not all on him too, because obviously his performance in training camp early in the year played a role, but you have to put the player in the best position to succeed. And I'm not entirely convinced that was the case with Johnson. And I know that from what we had heard, there was some frustration on both sides. And just another player, I wonder, does his style of play, what he bring, really fit with this organization? But again, until we know who the new coach, assuming it's not Vincent, or the new GM is going to be, it's tough to answer those questions. But those are the three main players I can see there, maybe being some change, whether it be Merzlikins, Line or Johnson. I wonder about their future. But what direction is this new GM going to go in? Are they going to continue to tear it down and maybe go for a first overall pick next year? I don't know. Will the draft lottery results impact their decision? If they would be fortunate and win the lottery against Macklin Celebrini, would that change their mind on how they go about things? It might. So obviously all these questions we don't know the answers to. It's tough to put their offseason plan together without knowing all those questions. But this team, like I said, it's got a good history of fan support. It has very poor history in terms of results. I feel for the fan base. They need and deserve better. And at this rate, they're far enough away that it's going to be at least a few years before they can get there. So, a couple of big things to look for here early is the new GM, what they do with coaching, and then from there to get an idea what that new GM's philosophy is going to be, how their feelings are on this roster and what they're going to do. But I think we could see significant overhaul with some key players on this team and continue a bit of a tear down in order to start building it back up after maybe one more year. But let me know what you think. And down in the comments, what are your expectations of the Blue Jackets this offseason? Down in the comments, we'll talk about it further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.